Broadcasting from the Bharat Mandapam behind me, the lights setting on India's G20. It's been a historic G20. The Prime Minister wanted this to be the catalyst of a new world order. On this special broadcast, we're going to do a before and after postmortem. I'm joined by three special guests. We had them with us on the same panel before the world leaders descended on New Delhi for the G20. And we have them back again, that dream team. Lots of conversation around different things that were said by Ian Bremmer, president of the Eurasia Group, joining us from the United States in New York. With us also this time from Taiwan is Kishore Mehbubani, well-known Singapore diplomat, author. He's been president of the United Nations Security Council, and India's top think tanker Samir Saran, president of the Observer Research Foundation, joining us as well despite nursing a sore throat. So thank you, Samir. I appreciate it. I want to go across first and foremost to Ian Bremmer, because the sense that I picked up from the panel was that the expectations about there being a joint communique were muted before all the world leaders landed in the capital for this G20 Leaders Summit. Mr. Bremmer, when you do a before and after postmortem, looking at what you thought would happen in Delhi, and now that you know most of what the outcome has been, how do you think it's gone?
Well, I thought it was going to be successful, and it slightly exceeded my expectations because of the joint communique. Probably made a little bit easier by the fact that Xi Jinping wasn't there. I don't think that Xi's absence really detracted from India's success and from the broader G20 success of the meeting. I also would point out that this joint communique, which did not discuss or call out Russia directly, but did support, uphold the UN Charter and abhor any restrictions or interventions against a country's territorial integrity and sovereignty, that formulation better reflects the interests of the G20, better reflects the interests of the countries that are attending. First and foremost, that of India, the host country. So I think that this does reflect a lot of hard work on the part of the Indian government, and particularly the Sherpa for the G20, a good working relationship between India and the United States, and a successful G20 summit this weekend.
Kishore Mehbubani, you're currently in Taiwan. You were meeting some top Taiwanese politicians for dinner, which is where we literally requested you to come out and join us. So give us a sense of how this is being decoded in Taiwan, and especially given the fact that Xi Jinping didn't come, there is a joint communique at the end, slightly muted language around the Russia-Ukraine war. What have been your main takeaways?
Well, unfortunately, I can tell you that the dinner in Taiwan didn't discuss the G20 meeting. It discussed actually whether or not Taiwan would become the next Ukraine, which is, of course, the big issue of the day in Taiwan. But to give you my perspective on the G20 meeting, I agree with Ian that I think India can regard this G20 meeting as a big success. Firstly, I think getting the African Union in as a member is a huge achievement. Because in most global meetings, the European Union, which represents 5 or 6% of the world's population, is hugely overrepresented. I mean, they send 3 or 4 representatives for every global meeting, which is crazy for such a small group of people on the planet Earth. The Africans, as you know, are going to be the fastest growing population on planet Earth. And the fact that Prime Minister Modi succeeded in getting the African Union as a permanent member of the G20 is a huge achievement. And the effects will be there for the next 20, 30 years. As the weight of Africa grows in global affairs, it'll be well represented in the G20. And secondly, I also agree with Ian that it's actually quite remarkable that there was a Greek joint statement. There was actually some fears there will be no joint statement, but there was one. And in some ways, actually, Ukraine has done India a big favor by criticizing the statement. Because when Ukraine criticized the statement, it showed that the statement was very balanced and neutral. it was trying to sort of understand that there are two sides to this issue, that certainly Russian invasion of Ukraine is illegal, no question about it. But at the same time, to find a solution, you have to get all the parties together. And so for India to succeed in getting a joint statement, but it's endorsed by everybody and criticized by Ukraine, shows that maybe at the end of the day, it was a kind of a balanced statement, and that shows where India is heading.
Okay. Samir Saran, you lost your voice the last couple of days, but India's voice was heard loud and clear on the global stage. Your before and after postmortem in terms of what you thought we'll end up with and where this Delhi declaration really leaves us.
Look, Rahul, we are thrilled. I think what we have been able to put together is outstanding, and under the circumstances is beyond anyone's expectation. So if anyone says they knew this would be the net result of the meeting, they deserve an Oscar. So I am clearly thrilled right now. I am over the moon. I'm proud to belong to India that was able to put together a very ambitious is the operating word here, declaration, which and this is something that Ian and I will have a longer conversation on later. But I think this document, in some sense, is the intellectual and political successor to the outcome at Pittsburgh in 2009. At that time, we had put together an economic framework for the future. The G20 replaced the G8 at that time and became the body for economic coordination. I think this time around, G20, despite the Ukraine crisis and the distractions and attendant discussions on that particular subject, this has become the development G20. SDGs, Global South, and issues that matter to humanity have been catered to in this particular document. So that's the first point, Rahul. This is certainly the successor to Pittsburgh, a new phase of G20's evolution. The second point I want to make is that Ian is right. The language is tougher and it is far more robust in terms of adhering to international law and the UN Charter, while, of course, the reference to Russia may have been deleted from the Bali Declaration. So it is tougher language on the actions of Russia without villainizing Russia, but more focus on upholding principles, which again suits all the G20 countries, especially some who face other neighbors who may want to change international boundaries. But please understand, the Security Council, with members who belong to the G20, could not pass a similar resolution in that council. One of them used to veto it. Here, 20 countries with veto passed that very simple upholding of international law and the UN Charter. So it's really something to be able to make that happen. So all credit to Team India, all credit to the Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, and the Sherpa. I'm happy, Rahul.
Ian Bremmer, I was reading just before we set this live show up a piece in Bloomberg which looked at what was happening in Delhi as a mini face-off, India versus China, Modi versus Xi, and saying to the extent that this was a limited contest, Modi scored 1 over Xi or India scored 1 over China. Given the end outcome, do you think that's a fair assessment?
Sure. But I mean, let's keep in mind a couple of things. One is that the Indian economy is growing gangbusters right now. Modi, very popular at home, has a strong relationship with the United States and will, whether Biden or Trump is successful in 2024, very strong relationship with Japan, but also has not alienated, at least not yet, major members of the global South. China's in a very different position. I mean, the big headlines this week, Xi Jinping not showing up at the G20, Italy announcing they're going to be leaving Belt and Road. The Indonesians, of course, they were thought to be the most important new member joining the BRICS. They chose not to be a part of it because they didn't want to have to be making choices or perceived as making choices against the G7. So this is not a good time for China. It's not a great week for China. I'm not surprised that India is making successful noises, but there's also been a lot of headlines in the United States that this is showing that China is somehow jettisoning the existing world order, that they want to build their own. They're not going to be any part of the G20 going forward. That's not true. I'm willing to bet you dollars to donuts on this show next year that Xi Jinping will be in Brazil for their G20 presidency. They will be sending high-level members for the ministerials going forward. This is not suddenly the end of China's meaningful role on the global stage or peak China. Samir and I talked about this at the beginning of the G20, the idea that India is making some great decisions right now, but they're still a minimum of 10 to 15 years behind the Chinese. That doesn't change just because you had a very successful weekend. So good marks for Modi, good marks for India, good marks for everyone attending the G20 this weekend, the G19. You added the Africa Union, you subtracted the Chinese and the Russians. But going forward, this is a long, long road in a dramatically changing global order.
Samir Saran, these aren't two countries that punch in the same economic weight category just at this moment. India most certainly behind China in terms of its economic growth story. But to the extent that this was a diplomatic and geopolitical contest, do you buy that at the end of the weekend round, it's Modi 1, Xi 0, India 1, Modi 0, just in the limited context of what was at play in Delhi?
Look, if diplomacy was a boxing round, this round belongs to India. Clearly, but Rahul, something else also happened here. And I think that is the problem when you are absent from big arenas. And maybe that also explained the absence of Xi from G20 this time around. Not only did you see Italy withdrawing from the BRI, but you also saw a bunch of European nations joining up, teaming up with the Middle East and India to put together a new connectivity offering. Something, let's be very clear, is a determined alternative to the BRI. Now, this is $47 trillion of GDP in terms of the countries who have signed up for this agreement. Now, if we can somehow find the leadership and, of course, the courage to make this work out, the $47 trillion countries who have teamed up, I think we can actually carve a more sustainable and certainly a more durable connectivity project in this part of the world that could become an exemplar for when we have to connect into Africa and Latin America and other parts of the world. So I think you are also seeing at this particular moment of time, the countries who have till now only been complaining about the BRI and Chinese action now beginning to try and map out an alternative rather than just protest. So that also happened at this particular time. And I just want to leave one more thought with you. The other image that tickled me coming out of the G20, and again, this is for Kishore and Ian to consider as well, was of the IPSA countries with the US and a joint statement coming after that. So is US coming into the IPSA play? Is that going to be the heft? Is that going to be the financier of IPSA being more ambitious in terms of its development going forward and not having to rely on the BRICS where China becomes the big banker? So I'm just leaving it out there. I think watch that space. IPSA plus USA is an interesting mix.